Excellent. And as a matter of courtesy, even though this will be publicly available, please do not quote our panelists in any external sources unless you have obtained their express agreement. At this juncture, I will pass the floor to Mr. David Sharia, Chief of Branch and Director at CTED, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Svetlana, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone, dear guests, colleagues. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's event gathered to launch CTED's latest trend tracker on evolving trends in the financing of FTF's activity and discuss how their financial methods and main expenditures evolved in the past 10 years. This publication and today's events also mark the 10th year's anniversary since the adoption of the landmark resolution of the Security Council Resolution 2178. That resolution paved the way for upcoming discussion of the Counter-Terrorism Committee on the implementation of this resolution. Let me recall that in this resolution, the Council in particular underlined the need to disrupt financial flows supporting FTFs while respecting international human rights law, international refugee law, and international humanitarian law. The Council also directed CTED to identify issues, trends, and developments relating to FTF. In this regard, the trend trackers offer a brief examination of how financial flows related to FTF travels and activities have evolved over the last 10 years, reflecting on changes in their locations and circumstances, especially as new conflict zones attract new terrorist networks. At the peak of the outflow of FTFs to Daesh-controlled territories in Syria and Iraq, financial activity linked to Daesh-inspired FTF typically involved collecting or sending small amounts of money to finance their own or others' travel to the destination. The money typically came from legal means, often personal savings, and sometimes could be collected by family or support groups. To sustain the needs of FTFs, funds could be wired to them abroad through formal or informal money service businesses, or if collected in cash, passed by couriers. The flow of funds primarily followed a straightforward path from countries of origin to Syria or Iraq, or neighboring countries, mirroring the movements of FTF themselves, making their financial footprints quite easily traceable. However, in subsequent years, there has been a marked diversification and evolution of these trends. The financial flows now traverse a wide geographical expanse, accompanied by a rise in regional FTF recruitment, encompassing a number of regions in Africa, Afghanistan, Central and Southeast Asia. The role of regional financial hubs has evolved and expanded. Soon after the adoption of increased due diligence measures for transactions, particularly in regions bordering conflict zones or high-risk jurisdictions, financiers adopted various methods of concealing their financial trails, using false identities and forged documents, electronic wallets, or prepaid cards funded through third countries. The expenditures and purpose of funding have also undergone a notable shift, from covering travel costs, living expenses in conflict zones, medical expenses, or purchasing weapons, towards sustaining individuals who have moved between different conflict zones or financing their return to their countries of origin. As technologies have advanced and new ways have been sought to obfuscate financial trails related to FTFs, donations are more and more often coordinated through encrypted mobile applications, closed chat groups, and funds are sent in the form of virtual assets. We at CTED foresee that technological advancement will continue to play an important role in the evolution of FTF financing, with an anticipated further increase in sophistication in the exploitation of new and emerging financial technologies. Overall, the financial patterns associated with FTFs have demonstrated remarkable adaptability, shifting from relatively simple methods to increasingly sophisticated and technologically advanced approaches. Today, by bringing together diverse stakeholders and experts CTED aims to foster a more sustainable, inclusive, and innovative approach to understanding this evolving threat and adapting our response to it. I will now give the floor to Ms. Svetlana Martinova, CTED Senior Legal Officer and Coordinator of our CFT work, who together with her team developed this report, and I would like to thank you all for this and to show our appreciation. She will give you an overview of the trends tracker and then moderate the discussions between the invited experts. Thank you all for joining us, and over to you, Svetlana.
Thank you very much, David. I just let the technical function to switch for now and make sure everybody can hear and see me. David, you have covered some of the important findings already in the opening remarks, so I will try not to repeat those. To build upon your last point, I would like to take the time to thank our CFT team, Preeti and Kana, who is unfortunately out sick today, as well as the political analysis research team, Rachel and Farah, for their work on the substantive research and creative infographics, as well as Vijay for the public information support for this publication and launch event, including the video, which you can also see through the link in the chat that I've just posted, and Akaki for the technical support throughout the process. Going back to the report itself, it covers trends and shifts related to FTF financial activities in multiple dimensions, which we will try and highlight today with our experts. There are clear geographical shifts in travel, recruitment, and conflict zones, which necessarily trigger shifts in related financial flows. Second, while some methods to raise and move funds remain similar to what they were 10 years ago, there are still quite prominent adjustments that essentially capitalize on the advantages of each method, be it the speed, the cross-border coverage, or potential to obscure the trace. And they adapt to various contexts in which they're used, often as a combination of several methods, and with the law of the evolution in force, the stronger, the more they persist. And then the technological advances are, of course, part of this adaptation, but they have not replaced the more traditional means and not solved the challenges related to those. Another dimension covers the expenditures and the mere purpose of funding. We now see a much wider spectrum, from travel to establishing new networks, to bribing and smuggling, to covering the return and reintegration expenses, to sending money by returnees to those left behind, and of course, multiple online fundraising campaigns that use all sorts of disguised calls for donations. Along these trends, we also see a potential for further convergence with criminal networks, including traffickers and drugs or arms dealers. And we also see a challenge, or rather multiple challenges, for impartial humanitarian action in armed conflicts where FTFs are also involved, where measures to counter the financing of terrorism may result in negative unintended consequences on the provision of vital humanitarian aid. In essence, it's the combination of all these trends and how easily they adapt to different situations, even with a single campaign, within a single campaign, from fundraising to moving the money to the final beneficiary, that makes it particularly challenging to address them effectively. The threat is by far no longer linear, but rather multidimensional. You will note that our analysis is rooted in solid research and referenced to the work of our partner organizations on the global and regional levels, including, of course, the UN and the Financial Action Task Force with its global network, as well as multiple research papers and analysis drawn by private sector stakeholders being on the front line of many of these campaigns and fund transfers. We are pleased to see many of those experts here as discussants today, and we will let them speak about the trends they observe in the course of their work. Let me first introduce them in the order we will have them speak for the first round of interventions. Ms. Miriam Kairala, expert analytical support and sanctions monitoring team that deals essentially with ISIL, al-Qaeda, and associated individuals and entities. Ms. Sylvia Deutsch, Deputy Director from the APG Mutual Evaluation Coordination and Support, will be joining us through pre-recorded intervention today due to time zone difference. Mr. Mikhail Kalinchenko, Counselor from the Secretariat of the Eurasian Group on Combating Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism. Ms. Vayana Sharma, Director, Anti-Terrorism Unit Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs in Trinidad and Tobago, and Mr. Ari Redbord, Vice President, Global Head of Policy and Government Affairs at TRM Labs. We will kick off with the first round of interventions, and I will ask our discussants to be brief in these first remarks so that we have time to come back to each of you and to let you also bounce off of each other's interventions. So without further ado, we'll kick in. And first, Miriam, if you could please kind of set the scene for us as well and speak a little bit about the main shifts in FTF movements, recruitment, and financing globally, including this trend that we have already touched upon that involves decentralization and multiplication and enhancement of regional financial hubs.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. First of all, good morning and good afternoon to all the participants who joined this session today. It's a pleasure to speak on behalf of the monitoring team for the 1267 and 1988 Sanctions Committee on ISIL, Daesh, al-Qaeda, and the Taliban. And thanks to CTED as well to invite us to participate in this valuable event. If you allow me, I'll answer the question, but I would like to share a couple of slides on some points reflecting the monitoring team findings as published in our regular reports. Next slide, please. So to answer your question, Svetlana, indeed, the terrorism financing threat around foreign terrorist fighters we are looking at today is somewhat different than the one observed a decade ago when the Security Council adopted Resolution 2178 in 2014. Back then, the FTF threat was characterized by unprecedented flows of over 42,000 fighters from more than 120 countries flying into Iraq and Syria. So as you mentioned, Svetlana, it was a linear flow of fighters towards these areas, often funded through personal means, family support, taking out loans, etc. This was also coupled with the use, as you know, of traditional means to move funds, such as hawala or money value transfer systems, or the physical transportation of funds. However, moving fast forward to today, since ISIL's territorial losses in 2019, the FTF threat landscape has somewhat evolved, and we now see trends that highlight ISIL's adaptability to new conditions. I'll focus today on two key trends observed by the monitoring team, including with respect to foreign terrorist fighters, which are one, the decentralization of ISIL's operations you noted, and two, the growing sophistication of financing methods. Next slide, please. So with regard to the first strand, and as noted in the slide, since ISIL lost control over territory in Iraq and Syria, we noted its activities have been increasingly decentralized to regional hubs, most notably in Africa and Central Asia. To characterize it, currently, 5 key regional ISIL financial offices are operational, with 2 of the biggest in Africa, one named Al-Qarar in Somalia and the other Al-Furqan in Lake Chad Basin, and one in Afghanistan named Al-Siddiq office covering ISIL Khorasan. Now, this shift from being focused on Iraq and Syria to now focusing on other regions also affects FTF recruitment, which has increasingly taken on a regional rather than global nature. In Africa, for example, we see increased recruitment from neighboring countries, as highlighted in our recent reports, which noted a rise in regional FTF recruitment, including, for example, arrests in Uganda of fighters from nearby countries attempting to procure materials for large-scale bombs, We also note the detention of 30 foreign terrorist fighters of various African nationalities in southwestern Libya. We also note as well the expansion of ISIL Somalia recruitment efforts within East and North Africa, with ISIL's Al-Qarar office acting as a financial and communication hub, facilitating funds transfers to other branches, including Afghanistan, using mobile money, cash, hawala, and others. Now, with respect to Afghanistan and ISIL Khorasan, our recent report also indicated the continued abuse of certain countries that serve as a transit hub for financial and logistical purposes, relying on networks of facilitators capable of moving operatives from Central Asia and Afghanistan towards Europe and other areas to conduct operations. Moving to the second trend I noted on the growing sophistication and the use of new financial technologies. And as you pointed out, Svetlana, in the beginning, we continue to note that the traditional methods continue to be predominantly used. But increasingly, we have been highlighting a mix in usage of new and traditional methods together. For funding sources, while we continue to note self-financing, we have also observed an increased reliance on fundraising, including through social media and crowdfunding, often with the use of virtual assets, sometimes focusing on specific types of virtual currencies, such as anonymity-enhanced cryptocurrencies like Monero. ISIL has also directed financial donations online instead of having supporters traveling or pushing supporters to travel to conflict zone. We also noted a lot of fundraising campaigns in multiple languages focused on the camps and detention facilities in northeast Syria to release the families associated with FTFs held in these camps. Moving to the expenditures aspects, these have also undergone a shift and became a little bit more regional. Funds are now sometimes used to establish new networks in different conflict zones and to invest in training and recruitment. This was also noted in the latest monitoring team report to have appeared in Africa, with ISIL Somalia, who invested in recruitment and has a strategy that relies reportedly on a network of spotters that put prospective recruits in touch with logisticians that arrange and pay for their transfer from departure up to reaching Puntland. Next slide, please. To delve a little bit on fundraising and the situation in northeast Syria, the team continues to note the use of funds to smuggle Daesh operatives and or their family members from camps and detentions, notably Al-Hol and Al-Roj camps. ISIL continues to be able to raise funds in Syria, with an example reported lately of $45,000 being raised in April 2024, managed by female ISIL members in Al-Hol camp. Our last report also noted that individuals have been smuggled out of the camps for a payment of around $2,000, in addition to several escape attempts. Here, the convergence with transnational criminal groups is worth highlighting, as in terms of movement, FTFs can exploit relatively porous borders and facilities or routes used by transnational organized criminals for various forms of smuggling to facilitate their return or relocation. And here, challenges in terms of availability and sharing internationally of biometric data related to these fighters continue to be raised by member states, the absence of which may create new security challenges. So to conclude, as you can see, these trends paint a picture of a more complex, globally distributed and technologically advanced approach to financing FTF travel and activities we see today, which demonstrates terrorist groups' adaptability in response to city pressure and changing geopolitical landscapes. I'm sure many panelists will delve into that in more details. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion. Thanks. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. I think it was a very clear setting of different trends that already David and I kind of alluded to, but you made it much more visual and I think much clearer to all of us. Really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those trends in further detail. But for now, I will now open the kind of regional perspective on these trends and maybe some that are specific to a certain region. We will start with Asia Pacific Group and Sylvia Deutsch, who is joining us through pre-recorded video presentation. So for her, there will be no opportunity to ask her questions in lifetime or to, have her comment on anything in the course of today's discussion, but I'm sure this presentation will be very useful for all our participants. And what I asked Sylvia to focus on was the main trends of FTF financing in the jurisdictions of APG, and if there are any more prominent or persisting challenges that are observed there. So I will ask Akaki to now please play that video.
Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Canberra. I'm Sylvia Deutsch, the Deputy Director for Mutual Evaluation Coordination and Support at the Asia Pacific Group on Money Laundering. It is a great pleasure to address you today, albeit virtually. I would like to thank you and CTED for organizing this important event. Today, I will share insights on the current trends and typologies related to the financing and facilitation of foreign terrorist fighters in the region. Before we delve deeper into the critical topic of financing for foreign terrorist fighters, I would like to take a moment to introduce the work of our organization, the Asia Pacific Group on Money Laundering, commonly referred to as the APG. So the APG is an intergovernmental organization comprising 42 member jurisdictions within the Asia Pacific region. Our primary mission is to ensure that our members effectively implement international standards aimed at combating money laundering, terrorist financing, and the proliferation financing related to weapons of mass destruction. This commitment to uphold and adhere to these international standards is what we refer to as compliance with the Financial Action Task Force standards. Jurisdictions are required to criminalize terrorist financing offenses, particularly covering the financing of foreign terrorist fighters' travel. So what is the rationale of these requirements? There are some elements that are really important to remember when we want to apply domestic laws and regulations covering the ability to prosecute and to penalize actions related with the financing of foreign terrorist fighters' travel, as you can see on the screen. So now, I would like to present key findings from a significant project undertaken by the Asia Pacific Group on Money Laundering in collaboration with the Global Center for Cooperative Security. This initiative aimed to investigate the use of financial intelligence pertaining to foreign terrorist fighters originating from, transiting through, or returning to Southeast Asia. Through our research, we analyzed financial patterns related to the support of foreign terrorist fighters. Our insights were drawn from a combination of open source information and invaluable data shared by member jurisdictions. The patterns that have been identified are activities around pre-travel, in transit, in conflict zone, and also the activities of returnees. So the global data indicates a notable trend regarding the demographics of foreign fighters, revealing that they are predominantly male. However, it is crucial to acknowledge the evolving landscape of violent extremism in Southeast Asia, where the roles of women are expanding significantly. Women are increasingly becoming active participants, not only as perpetrators, but also as recruiters, propagandists, and facilitators of logistical and financial support for this extremist movement. Two main changes on the after Caliphate era, such as the relocated travelers to Khorasan and Jammu Kashmir, and foreign fighters going to Southeast Asia, especially the Philippines. As the information revealed that Australian and Indonesian foreign fighters were detected of planning a trip to Khorasan and Jammu Kashmir. They were intended to join the ISIS-affiliated group based in those areas. Besides as a planner, they are also communicators and intermediaries for financial support between local groups and the international networks. Southeast Asia has increasingly emerged as a critical destination for the recruitment of foreign fighters, attracting individuals from both within the region and beyond. This shift has raised significant concerns, particularly as numerous foreign nationals have been detained while en route or apprehended upon arrival, with many suspected of having affiliations with ISIS-linked groups. Indonesia and the Philippines have been identified as emerging hubs for ISIS militants within Southeast Asia. We also observe the involvement of fighters from various parts of the world, including countries in the Middle East and Europe, many of whom have established connections to ISIS or al-Qaeda affiliated organizations. The case studies presented on the screen illustrate critical insights concerning Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. Foreign fighters from these jurisdictions have expressed intentions to establish residency in Indonesia and the Philippines, viewing these locations as strategic destinations for participation in ongoing conflicts. Numerous jurisdictions have also reported the identification of distinct patterns of financial behavior exhibited both prior to and during the travel of foreign fighters. The patterns that have been identified are, first, related to the preparation prior to the departure, the method of withdrawing the money by cash, and some actions to secure travel documents and airline tickets. In the transit zones, the case studies show the efforts of using friends networks and online communication to facilitate the trade, or even they disguise the activities by using humanitarian and housemaid works as covers. In terms of foreign fighters' activities in the conflict zones, sending or receiving funds by international transfer to or from conflict zones were also identified, including accessing internet banking from the IP addresses, credit or debit payments, and ATM cash withdrawals, which were done in or near conflict zones. The authorities also monitored activities done by returnees where they purchased airline tickets from a conflict zone or bordering areas. They also resumed active account usage after a period of stoppage, used debit or credit card, or even selling personal assets or self-funding to finance the travel through the Turkey route. We discovered that Hong Kong and Malaysia have emerged as significant transit destinations for foreign terrorist fighters en route to conflict zones. The case studies revealed various methods employed, including the physical transport of cash or valuable gemstones, as well as the establishment of marriage arrangements with local individuals. Now, let's discuss about the stages of funding for foreign fighters. There are some significant resources of funds had been observed in the past few years, as presented on the screen. First, contribution from overseas friends networks, where the overseas fighters who had successfully arrived in Syria and been connected to the ISIS leaders, they transferred money through a legitimate money service business in Iraq and Jordan to support a local terrorist group in Indonesia. Next, as I mentioned before, social circles like funds from local friends are really important to the sustainability of funding. Self-funding from legal sources, such as through legal businesses, selling personal assets and belongings, and even obtaining money from relatives. Next, social media and any other encrypted messaging applications had also been used, including they have done fundraising or collecting money from criminal activities. Some case studies also demonstrated fundraising activities facilitated by new payment methods or using cash deposit machines. Next, the misuse of non-profit organizations is still one of targeted activities done by terrorists by conducting religious meetings or using a domestic educational foundation to assist the travels of foreign nationals or using humanitarian aid works as a cover. Other channels were also used, such as withdrawing money from a social insecurity account, personal loans, insurance policies, and also pension funds. Next, the fighters use legal money service businesses to transfer money or to move money to destination countries with recipients in Pakistan, Turkey, or Thailand for the purpose of general financial support for ISIS networks. Some trends using hawala, cash deposit machines, and also virtual currencies were also identified to move or access funds. Cash activities were also monitored, with case studies showing the money was withdrawn from the bank account of a Jordanian national or withdraw money by cash after receiving funds through a legitimate money service business, as known as a pass-by transaction, to avoid detection. There were also fighters taking the money out by cash from the PayPal balance, then deposit the funds to terrorist bank accounts, or using cash couriers, and the use of anonymous mobile payments, and the use of third-party and mule accounts. It was reported that foreign fighters actively used social media or encrypted messaging platforms to facilitate the recruitment of foreign fighters and to discuss the preparation of traveling or even facilitating the travel of other foreign fighters, including the conspiracy of using travel agents. Next, the network of female financial facilitators based in the Philippines, including wives, was an interesting finding. Let's discuss about the increased female financial facilitators. Women followed their husbands to the caliphate, and very few were manipulated or lacked agency in their decision. The dominant roles of female terrorists are in offering tactical contributions, including but not limited to operational and organizational support. The terrorist organizations promote an ideology that classifies women as second-class citizens and offers strategic and financial benefits through women's subjugation. There is a greater concern of migrant workers engaged with radical groups. They speak better English, have higher qualifications and capabilities to establish more contacts internationally. This is why they become more resourceful than others. There are also other challenges that warrant our attention. First, returnees. One significant issue is the lack of effective monitoring regarding the financing linked to the returnees and their families. Current counter-financing of terrorism policies do not adequately synchronize with disintegration and the deradicalization programs. So this creates a potential gap in our efforts to oversee and support these individuals. Next, technological innovations. The landscape of financing has become increasingly complex, with fighters now leveraging advanced digital technologies to obtain and transfer funds. Especially, we observe a trend where public resources are being mobilized through crowdfunding efforts, resulting in substantial pools of diverse contributors. The last one is the misuse of nonprofit organizations. Our concerns also extend to the potential abuse of nonprofit organizations. There is a concerning trend of exploitation within formal nonprofit organizations, including the use of crowdfunding initiatives promoted on social media platforms, apparently to benefit these organizations. So in conclusion, it is imperative that we address these interconnected issues with strategic seriousness, fostering improved collaboration among agencies and enhancing our frameworks to ensure effective intervention and support. So, as I wrap up my presentation today, I want to thank you for your time and attention. It's been a pleasure sharing insights with you, and I hope you found the information as exciting and relevant as I do. If you have any questions or thoughts, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm just an email away and would love to engage with you further. You can send an email to mail@mpgml.org, and then we can start from there. Thank you once again, and see you at another event.
Well, I remotely thank Sylvia for her presentation, which was very informative, and I'm not even going to try and summarize or, kind of make any conclusions, because it was self-explanatory, a lot of trends highlighted, but I do want to pick up on one in particular, and that's the point on the role of women as not only active perpetrators, but facilitators of recruitment networks, financial transfers. And this is very often overlooked as a risk factor in the threat assessment. And when we have our risk assessments that are gender blind, we're also blind in our responses, because if we are not looking for abuses there where they tend to happen, we're missing that trend entirely. And I believe this is something that is important to highlight. Other than that, and before I move on to Eurasian group, I just wanted to let everyone know that there's an active discussion in the chat. And that's what it is there for. For our panelists, if you see something there that relates to you, please react either in writing or in your subsequent interventions. By all means, we have a free discussions here. I see in particular that there are some questions and experiences shared with respect to the use of QR codes. I think that's the point that was recently picked up also by monitoring team reports, and of course Monero wallets and the challenges related to investigations. So please feel free to attend to that. And now I am moving to Mikhail, and good luck with competing with APG's presentation. I'm joking, but I want to actually trigger some reactions from you with respect to whether you see similar trends in your region, whether there are some specific ones, and the main changes and shifts that you have identified most recently. And the reason I'm also zooming in the work of EAG is because you have done this FTF financial profile analysis twice, not only once, but twice, at the kind of peak time of the activity and as it has changed by now. So this is of particular relevance to us in our event. Go ahead, Mikhail.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. Distinguished colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and greetings from Minsk. First of all, I would like to congratulate CTED for developing this overview of the evolving trends in the financing of foreign terrorist fighters activity. I'm also honored that particular results of EIG's efforts have been reflected in this document. Indeed, the FTF issue is especially relevant to EIG region. In particular, Afghanistan is the source of tension in the region, given the considerable number of terrorist organizations that are still present and operating in this country, and the fact that the members of these organizations are also natives of the Eurasian region states. In recent years, as Svetlana already said, EIG has conducted two typology reports in 2017 and 2023. To develop the unified financial profiles of foreign terrorist fighters in the EIG region. In general, the findings of this research correlate with the global trends and the trends of APG region mentioned by my colleague. According to the results, one of the main threats of terrorist financing to the region, to the EIG region, are citizens of the countries of the region traveling abroad to participate in armed conflicts, members of their families that follow them and share their ideas, as well as those returning from areas of heightened terrorist activity. Based on data provided, funds for terrorist financing in the countries of the region are mainly raised from legitimate sources. There are frequent cases of self-financing through one's own salary or through the provision of one-time services and work. The most common method is financial assistance from relatives. Besides that, money for terrorism financing can be received from the ethnic diasporas living abroad. The internet is also actively used to raise funds for terrorist financing, with more common instances of fundraising by deceiving users of the web. Among the illegal methods of raising funds, the most common are the proceeds of drug trafficking, property crimes, as well as cash smuggling. a key shift in the methods of financing terrorism in the ERG region, including foreign terrorist fighters and their financing that we have recently identified is the use of modern payments methods, particularly virtual assets. As part of the ERG's topology work in this sphere, we have developed indicators related to the use of virtual assets to identify financial transactions of FTFs. One of such indicators is the IP or MAC address from which the crypto wallet is managed, points to the territory with increased terrorist activity or border areas. Many thanks again for the opportunity to speak at this event, and I would like to answer the questions if it's needed. Thank you very much. By my time.
Thank you very much, Mikhail, and thank you for also highlighting the various trends as they evolve in geography, but also in the different combinations, including with criminal activity. On your last point with the modern payment methods, of course, this is a trend that we keep hearing from, I think, all of our discussions. I will reflect on this separately towards the closing, but I think your last point on the indicators is very worth emphasizing because it has a very practical nature. And if this work is public, maybe you could consider sharing it in the chat. I think it will also go along the current discussions there of experts who are working on these issues. Now, we're moving to a national perspective, and it's not by chance that we have Vaina from Trinidad and Tobago today, because we know that at a certain point, Trinidad and Tobago was the state with the highest per capita rate of departing FTFs in the Caribbean region in relation to its population. And we also know that since then, Trinidad and Tobago has done a lot of work to address this challenge, including from the angle of tracing and curtailing the financing of FTF activity. So I will pass the floor now to the representative of the state to see and educate us at what results have you achieved and how these trends shifted lately for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Svetlana, for that wonderful introduction. And good afternoon, good morning to everyone in the panel. Thank you for the opportunity for providing Trinidad and Tobago a chance to contribute to today's discussion, particularly given the importance of the UN CTED's work in this report on financing trends tracker. And we are extremely pleased because we get the opportunity to share domestic experiences with everyone in this audience and those who would be replaying the video for another chance. At the governmental level and across sectional level, the work on counterterrorism is a top priority for us. And this it resonates with all of our activities to prevent radicalization. And we have a very well coordinated regime in Trinidad for dealing with this. Firstly, bringing on square point the issue that we were known for, or dealing with the perception and using the term highest per capita, which paints a picture of bringing Trinidad and Tobago into the spotlight. When we look at the denominator on the size of the domestic population that we have, which is quite small for some, 1.4, 1.5 million, and the total number of persons who would have actually traveled to the conflict zones, it was quite larger for some other countries, as we could have seen from the report. And for those who get a chance to look at it, there are approximately persons who traveled from over 120 countries that left to join ISIS. And for Trinidad and Tobago, the persons who would have traveled would include adult males, their wives, and we heard from a previous panelist on the role in which wives would be supporting, and the children. So the picture of what was occurring in Trinidad and Tobago in around 2013 to 16 is fundamentally very different from how it is now, where we saw with the movement of persons, them being funded via self-funding or funds from family members and support that they would generate through their means. In focusing on the work and moving the country to where we are now, we looked very closely at a targeted approach for our response actions and how we dealt with changing those trends. Following the financial activity, implementing to a high level the requirements for UNSCR 2178, targeted freezing, targeted awareness, and looking at any areas for FTF financing amongst the population. So in terms of moving the country away from the spotlight, and that is what our main focus has been, we've not seen persons leaving the jurisdiction for that purpose since 2016, which is approximately around 8 years ago. And we've had a number of action items to counter this narrative and addressed the risks that have evolved. We've no longer seen persons joining terrorist organizations that have been designated. There's a higher level of diligence of detecting terrorist financing, and the number of STRs that have been filed when you look at the review from, for example, publicly available documents via the Financial Intelligence Unit annual report for Trinidad and Tobago demonstrate that trends and money flows are no longer prominent. For example, in 2023, the report does reflect that there were only about 8 SDRs on suspected financing of terrorism, and it was the same number in the year before. We, in conducting its analysis, it demonstrated that there was a low reporting of FT-related STRs and SARs, which is attributable to the collapse of the ISIS and the Caliphate. Also in Trinidad, we mitigated our risks by strengthening robustly our legislative framework. And we did that by looking at any gaps within the Anti-Terrorism Act and closing those as quickly as we could, bringing that legislation to the Parliament. And that, of course, we also applied a multi-pronged approach in our investigative work and in looking closely at any associated terrorist financing that may or would have been occurring with amongst our NPOs or NPOs that may be targets for that kind of funding. We've seen a change in the pull factor. So over the past few years, there have been no investigations that has resulted in terrorist financing, and we have no cases. And we don't see that we have seen that there hasn't been a change in this framework. We have been robustly assessed by the CFATF for having strong compliance when it comes to anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism for our TF regime. And dealing with these threats and ensuring that our vulnerabilities are reduced, the threat has been diminished to a great extent. From a coordination perspective, we have the National CT strategy, which is being reviewed and updated to be aligned with our national AML CFT policies and strategies. And this work is being done via a very rigorous task force, which is the interministerial Committee on Countering Terrorism that was established at the very highest level by the National Counter-Terrorism Committee and via the strategy that we had. And we also have been doing quite a lot of work within our proactive task force of Task Force Charlie that looks at potential designations. And Task Force Charlie is chaired via the Anti-Terrorism Unit that leads with its obligations in the domestic framework for anti-terrorism. And Task Force Charlie has ensured that we have 9 domestic designations, and we've also successfully proposed 2 names to the UNSC 1267 list. So in ensuring that we have also a robust system formulating our law enforcement regime through the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, with our special branch, our Terrorism Interdiction Unit, our Ministry of National Security Counter-Terrorism Unit, and applying a multi-pronged approach. Together with our robust legal framework, we have really mitigated the risks that would have resonated to ensure we treat with frontally where there is this perception of having a significant or highest per capita travel of foreign terrorist fighters. In terms of moving forward as well, we have done very strong training and sensitization regionally amongst the CFATIF and with our CARICOM counterparts, and then even border in forums such as this. And we're very pleased to share our experiences of having a comprehensive whole of government and whole of society solution. We have looked very closely at the role in which our preventative and violent extremism work is coordinated via our task force Nightingale, and that work has allowed for us to look at the issue of how there's a nexus of returning foreign terrorist fighters and or their families, and to treat with any risks that or threats that may resonate from that end. The government is looking at legislation to implement a regime to allow for the returnees to be dealt with in a fair and humanitarian manner. And we are working closely to ensure that we have our interagency group and the collaboration with key support from humanitarian and NPOs. So throughout with our work domestically, Svetlana, and sharing that experience, you know, with the wider region, we have put this as a top priority, as I've indicated, and I would be willing to take any questions and respond to items in the chat. So thank you for the opportunity to provide this brief contribution.
Thank you so much for your overview of really how effective the response can be once the threat is understood and identified. What I would like to, and it was all music to my ears, to be honest, as CTED expert, all these progress that you have made. But I want to pick up on a couple of things. You've mentioned addressing the gaps in TF criminalizations and investigations. That is, of course, key. It took us this 10 years to get member states to a more or less compliant legislation overall globally, where the FTF travel was not part of TF criminalization before. And the more cases the states dealt with, the more experience they had, the more apparent it became that this granular kind of inclusion actually serves a purpose. And we have analyzed that in our recent gaps assessment. Also, the point on the aligning CT strategy with EML CFT strategy is key. And from my end, I will advocate for it endlessly, because we have two parallel universes in most cases where EML CFT strategy understands the risks, has measures, but it never goes up to the CT strategy, and people work in complete silence. And your point on listings, designations domestically and even to UN of FTFs related individuals, I mean of FTFs themselves, this is key. We have been, advocating for that through the resolutions, through, our dialogue with member states. Most member states do not do that, and it's really landing on deaf ears, because they consider this too small of a case, and then you have hundreds of people essentially involved in terrorist activity and terrorist financing activity that is allowed. And finally, these sensitization of the population and on what constitutes the offense and how to deal with this and how to, avoid committing illegal actions. This is, of course, key. The point on returnees relates what some people in the chat have raised. It's a very challenging area, and it's very specific to each state and to the context of the state and how they can address the threat, and how they deal with any potential reoccurrences of activity in these groups. So we are here on the learning side to learn from each state experience in how to best deal with this. I stop here because I'm taking time of our panelists. And I am now turning to the private sector perspective. And our friend from TRM Labs, Ari, we had you and your colleagues in several events recently, and we can't get enough of you. We also cite you extensively in the trends report because you work with the national authorities in different states to trace blockchain transactions that are part of terrorism financing activities, and identifying based on those real cases relevant trends is key to understanding what's going on, including in relation to online fundraising with the use of virtual assets. And sometimes, as we've mentioned, I think already, it's often it's disguised under some humanitarian calls, but eventually used by terrorist groups and their supporters, including, for example, to smuggle detainees out of prisons or bribe the officials or pay the traffickers. Is this still a prominent trend that you're seeing? And are there any new ones that we've missed in our overview? And how do you work with authorities and law enforcement to help them keep pace with these developments?
Svetlana, thank you so much. And thank you for CTED for having us today. I'm so glad that you can't get enough of us. That means a lot. The tracker is really an excellent addition to the growing trends discussion when it comes to terrorist financing. And really excited to kind of double down on some of the cryptocurrency conversation that has already taken place with the other excellent speakers. It's important to note at the outset that cryptocurrency is not the primary way in which terrorist organizations like ISIS raise and send funds, but we are seeing increasing activity and experimentation in the use of cryptocurrency to these organizations or from these organizations. At TRM, we work with global law enforcement and national security agencies to track and trace cryptocurrencies used for terrorist financing and other illicit activities. So I'm just going to jump right into some of the trends. One of the most notable trends in terror financing is the growing sophistication in the way groups like ISIS are using cryptocurrency. And this has been mentioned by a few of the other speakers and also in the chat. These groups have become adept at hiding their financial activities, utilizing increasingly complex strategies. This is especially challenging when dealing with fundraising campaigns for ISIS members and families held in camps in Syria. These campaigns often promote themselves as humanitarian in nature, and to some extent they may be. But the reality is that they ultimately benefit ISIS, given that the group leverages the funds raised to maintain their influence in the camps. This makes it challenging for authorities to differentiate between legitimate aid and illicit financing, adding layers of complexity to law enforcement. It's important to note I spent about 11 years at the U.S. Department of Justice as a prosecutor, really primarily focused on terror financing and other types of illicit activity. I then spent a couple years at the U.S. Treasury Department, and in those years, we were investigating cases involving networks of shell companies and hawalas and high-value art and antiquities. And you couldn't trace those funds, those means of value transfer the way you can cryptocurrency. So all of these layers of complexity to law enforcement, but we're still able to track and trace these funds in ways we never were in the traditional world. Going back to the campaigns, illustrating the importance of tracking these campaigns is a really, really good example. It's the March 2024 attack in Moscow that left over 130 people dead and many others injured. Shortly after that attack, ISIS claimed responsibility. Upon investigation, authorities discovered that the attackers had used cryptocurrency to fund the operation, at least in part. The addresses linked to the attackers had initially been part of a fundraising campaign for Tajik ISIS members and their families held in these internment camps in Syria. By tracing these funds, authorities could connect the dots, showing how a seemingly isolated campaign contributed to a large-scale attack and highlighting the global reach and danger of these networks. Again, something else that has been mentioned previously and in the chat is the use of privacy technology and stablecoins. As law enforcement has ramped up its capabilities to track cryptocurrency transactions, terrorist groups have adapted by improving their operational security. We're now seeing increasing use of privacy technologies like Monero, decentralized exchanges, one-use wallet addresses, and unhosted wallets. Terrorists are even using fake credentials to mask their real identities. Another trend is the adoption of stablecoins, particularly Tether USDT on the Tron blockchain, due to its stability and low transaction fees. This allows groups to move significant sums efficiently and discreetly, adding yet another hurdle for authorities to intercept their activities. Because of the growing use of USDT on Tron, TRM recently announced the T3 partnership, in which we have formed a financial crime unit with Tron and Tether to investigate terrorist financing and other activity in Tether on Tron, and work with law enforcement to investigate and mitigate the risks. The program has already enabled law enforcement to seize back about $60 million in the first few months that the program has been operational. This is an excellent example of the type of public-private partnerships that can be leveraged to combat terrorist financing. Let's just talk briefly about a few specific disruptions, and then I look forward to the conversation. A critical case is the August 2023 joint operation between Turkish and Tajik authorities, which resulted in the arrest of Shamil Hukumov, a high-ranking ISIS Khorasan province fundraiser, ISKP. Hukumatov had been operating a fundraising campaign to recruit Tajiks for ISKP in Afghanistan, as well as for members and families in Syrian camps. An address controlled by him had 2 million in USDT on the Tron blockchain, receiving donations through centralized exchanges and unhosted wallets. With the help of TRM Labs and Binance, authorities were able to track these funds, identify the accounts, and work with local law enforcement to disrupt the network. The case exemplifies the power of public-private partnerships in fighting terror financing, showcasing how intelligence shared by TRM enabled local authorities to arrest Hukumov and 2 others involved. By leveraging blockchain technology, authorities can effectively intercept funds and dismantle terror networks. Taking a 30,000-foot view of the problem in terms of the camps, let's talk about the involvement of the camps in Syria and how we can potentially work together to mitigate these risks. The camps in Syria, particularly Al-Hol and Roj, remain a hotbed for ISIS ideology. Following the defeat of ISIS's territorial caliphate, thousands of ISIS fighters, families, and supporters were detained and taken to these camps. The influence of ISIS ideology within these camps persists, with many detainees still loyal to the group's cause and actively working to sustain its activities financially. The existence of these camps poses a significant global security risk. They not only act as recruitment grounds, but also as hubs for financial networks that funds ISIS activities both locally and internationally. While these fundraising campaigns are often masked as humanitarian aid, they are in many cases direct channels of support for ISIS. By repatriating their citizens, countries can help to dismantle these networks, reducing the risk of radicalization and limiting the group's ability to operate globally. To disrupt ISIS's influence within the camps and reduce the flow of funds, it's crucial for countries to repatriate their citizens. Leaving detainees in the camps prolongs their exposure to ISIS ideology and allows them to continue coordinating and fundraising by the group. So what comes next here? Illicit actors such as terrorist financiers are always going to be early adopters of new technology. But we're also seeing law enforcement and national security agencies leverage blockchain technology to track, trace, and disrupt terrorist organizations that raise and send funds using cryptocurrencies. We must all work together, public-private partnerships, to stop terrorist financiers from raising and deploying funds. Following the money in this way can literally stop terrorist attacks. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Ari. And sorry.
Voy a matar a este pibe.
Can you please mute the microphones of those who are not speaking? Yes, it just exactly like your intervention proves my point why we cannot have enough of you, because you just went through our agenda on PPPs, private-public partnerships, on all the evolving technologies, on the issue of camps and fundraising campaigns and recruitment, and the need to address that issue urgently. So that we don't have these kind of situations of ultimately no solution, but also for highlighting how these fundraising campaigns really seemingly almost innocent in their disguised presentation can be directly linked to hideous terrorist attacks happening in completely random parts of the world. Also wanted to highlight one point you mentioned. You've provided a lot of examples on how you're working with national authorities, which is also what we are citing throughout the trends tracker from your sources and relevant events that I will keep posting in the chat. But a little bird told me that you are also going on the global level, and that even Interpol could benefit from your experience and technologies that you offer. Is there anything you could share with us at this stage? And no problem if it's too soon.
Yeah, no, I'd say very little about the partnership, and that's honestly, like, broadly, don't speak too much about sort of who's specifically using this technology. But I can say that definitely that we've worked very closely with Interpol over the years on these issues. It's really fun for me, over the last 4 or 5 years to see the level of sophistication around this technology that we're seeing from global law enforcement, and that really starts with Interpol in a really meaningful way. So that's been really, really great. I think when you're talking about an Interpol, there's just so much more reach there. And it's critical to see, it's great to see them working closely with national authorities as well, who have these capabilities and have this expertise. Look, I think at the end of the day, the terrorist financiers, other illicit actors are going to use any technology that can be effective in moving funds faster and in larger amounts than ever before. And cryptocurrency allows for that. But I think what we're really starting to see is Interpol and others globally leverage the technology itself to track and trace funds, to build cases, to stop bad actors. So, the more training, the more expertise, the better here as we move sort of further and further into this digital world. But really, to your question, excited to work with Interpol and really, really extraordinary to see sort of the leveling up that they've been doing in the technology space over the last few years.
Terrific. I think that this is really important point, and just to underline how similar of a challenge we're all facing, and how impossible it is to address it alone. We really need to work together, not only as intergovernmental partnerships, but with private sector and other stakeholders in a very close manner. I will take a second to scroll over the chat in case I've missed everything. But what I'd ask to do, we don't have much time. We only have 20 minutes left in an entire session. But if I can have our panelists back on camera, and just check with them first if there are any thoughts or reflections they could offer at this stage, now that we have heard all 5 of you, to kind of link them all together, and something that maybe struck you in particular, either in your interventions or in the chat conversation. So you can just wave at me if you want to be given the floor right now. And this is a completely informal discussion, just to reflect on each other's points. Looking for the first wave? Yes, Anna, please.
Thank you, Svetlana. And just building on the points that Ari made on the way in which private partner support to law enforcement. And, you know, he used the example of working closely with Interpol for small countries such as Trinidad and Tobago, where we have small teams of units that are focusing on terrorism and terrorist financing investigations and that are armed with the best capacity, them learning and getting experience from persons like Ari and using the case examples that Ari can share to build on their portfolio, even in mock exercises, can really elevate from a general perspective of how to treat with those specialist investigations. So I wanted to applaud the work ongoing by Ari and demonstrate for smaller jurisdictions such as Trinidad and Tobago, even though we were painted with the highest per capita ratio, you know, quite some time ago, and we have we have supported law enforcement and our intelligence agencies to treat with the investigations. We see with the trends how there's been changes, and with looking at those changes, if we do an introspection on where funding can be operating or there be a nexus to Trinidad and Tobago, getting that technical support from Ari and members of his team could cross-blend to many of the countries and the listeners that we have here.
Thank you so much. Really, really good point here. Miriam, did I see a wave from you or yes? Okay, go ahead, please.
Well, just echoing also what the other panelists mentioned and what Ari also just mentioned now. We have been noticing that from our conversations with member states, indeed the same trends that were mentioned by multiple panelists. And on the points mentioned on the use of cryptocurrencies, including stable coins and Monero, I think that a key takeaway that I would take it is that it's important to be adaptable and to do a proper risk assessment because the threat landscape is changing. We used to see, for example, a rise in the use of certain virtual currencies, then focusing on others. The fundraising campaigns are becoming more and more complex. Because they're trying to disrupt or to hide the identities behind some sort of facade that would look humanitarian or legitimate. So I think being adaptable and having a proper risk assessment, looking at it from delving into the details is important, just to be able to understand the picture. Also, information sharing, having biometric data is very important to allow authorities to trace, because many of these individuals, we do not have information sometimes on their birth date, any information whether they are alive, not, their status, their location. So I think having biometric data on these individuals is crucial to be able to trace them, and many member states raise these concerns because this can raise security concerns in the future. Thank
you. If I could just respond, Svetlana,
yeah.
if I could just respond to one thing that Miriam said. I thought she made a really good point around sort of how do we think at least about differentiating between actual humanitarian efforts and this type of terrorist financing, and it's very granular from an operational perspective. I thought it might be useful. I mean, we're looking at we're looking at so many different pieces of this. We look at indicators such as the lingo used, the images used, what are references to key ISIS events, if the campaign was promoted in a known jihadist chat, for example, what are the nationalities of the individuals who are held. For example, would a European citizen end up in a camp in Syria if it wasn't for them joining ISIS before its collapse? We take this very seriously because obviously we don't want to get it wrong, but we also want to really, really ensure that we are taking a really granular sort of operational look. So I didn't plan to get this operational today, but I think it is really important to sort of make that distinction between, or at least talk through how we're thinking about differentiating between actually true humanitarian fundraising and the sort of ISIS activity.
Thank you, Ari. That's really a good point, and we only kind of superficially touched upon it in our trends tracker as highlighting kind of a trend that is not going to disappear, and that it's going to become even more challenging as we have expanding conflict zones, where we have these unresolved issues with detention, and it is really a challenge. I don't have a better word, and taking the time and the effort to distinguish and differentiate what constitutes a truly illegal activity and what is actually a humanitarian aid or cause. It's really it's essential to be able to avoid all the unintended consequences, but also to address the threat where it actually is. Mikhail, do you have any reflections to just to highlight what has been discussed so far?
Yes, Svetlana, thank you. Actually, not. I just want to mention some other documents of UN family. It's a handbook on countering the misuse of vital assets for terrorist financing purposes, concerning ERG practice to mitigating the risks of using vital assets in terrorist financing purposes. I place the link in the chat, and I think this document can be useful, practically useful for our colleagues in combating the terrorist financing risks. Not maybe not, of course, not only to FTFs, but of the terrorist financing as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. We have a little over 10 minutes left, of which I would reserve 5 for some very brief closing remarks. So I will turn to the I think the chat conversation is really fruitful, and most of the questions that were raised were either addressed directly there or in our discussions and interventions. I hope I'm not missing anything crucial, but indeed we have touched upon the modern technologies, the various digital assets, how they come with their particular challenges. The issue of returnees, the issue of linkages with criminal activity, human drug trafficking, etc. So I think that gives us a good palette. I would like to use these 5 minutes to see if there are any burning questions from the floor. And so I would ask to raise hands and really ask your question in 1 minute, if possible. And if there are multiple hands, I will go by the priority given to member states, those who are attending this briefing today. I'll just pause here for a little moment to see. Oh, not all at once. Okay, I see something. A question for maybe Ari about any ongoing efforts to broaden contracts with government as it relates to attribution as a whole, whether for this typology or anything related. There's also a question into technical assistance priorities, and thank you, Franz. I recognize the family, the UN family. And this is indeed a key issue on how we can work together to support member states in those areas where they struggle the most. So I hope we can highlight that. And thank you, Mikhail, for highlighting also the handbook that OCT and CTED were able to work together on with you. So it's a great resource as well. So since I pointed Ari, I'll pause for a moment if you have any further thoughts, and then give a go on TA to anybody.
Sure. Just very quickly on the first question. Yeah, I mean, we work with every U.S. federal law enforcement agency, and then globally most national law enforcement agencies, plus many, many state and local. We do see more and more demand as we move into a digital age where bad actors, not just terror financiers, but others, are looking to use cryptocurrencies. So yeah, that is, I'm not sure if that's the answer to the question, but we're certainly working with many, many national law enforcement authorities, national security agencies, et cetera, today who are using these types of tools. Yeah. Svetlana, was there another one?
There was one on how this conversation that we've had today and all these observations and analysis help shape the technical assistant priorities. I'm looking also at Mikhail and other speakers, because this is something that collectively we're trying to address as international and regional organizations. So if anyone has a short thought on this, please go ahead. Just jump straight in.
To take the floor as Svetlana with respect to technical assistance, and I think drawing from our visits as monitoring team to member states, we hear their assessment of the threat, but also we hear at the same time what are their needs in terms of technical assistance and to counter or to mitigate the risk of the threats that they are seeing. And I think there's not just one answer, but I think it's interconnected to many things that were raised by many of the speakers, including, for example, we talked about the repatriation and the returning foreign terrorist fighters. So I think one part is related to the prosecution, repatriation, reintegration of foreign terrorist fighters. Another part is related to investigation. So we talked a lot about tracing financial transactions, whether it is normal through Hawala or the predominant or the traditional methods that or the new technologies, whether crypto or not, and enhancing member states' investigations and abilities to investigate and to trace cryptocurrency-related transactions, understanding also the things related to that. So I think it's multiple things at the same time, which may be used by TA bodies, and it's interlinked, as you mentioned, between many UN families as well as the private sector. So that would be my take on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. And of course, I can't help but self-advertise. The mandate of CTED includes facilitation of technical assistance, and in the area of countering financing of terrorism, we now do annual gaps assessment based on our and FATF FSRB assessments of the year to identify any specific gaps in any area or in an area of focus. And that is really mandated by the Security Council as the foundation for targeted technical assistance. We publish these assessments in a kind of sterilized form where the specific gaps are not addressed to any particular state, so that technical assistance providers can have an idea of what are the priority gaps that need assistance, and then we invite them to reach out to us or to use our closed resources for specific country information, and we hope that is helping everybody. I will now move on to the closing part. It will be very informal. I will just announce really what lies ahead based on what we discussed. Of course, we will continue jointly with your collective help to analyze evolving trends and threats and risks, not only related to FTFs, but overall in the CFT area. To address the many challenges that most of you raised in relation to new and emerging technologies, including virtual assets and others. We are hoping that the Counter-Terrorism Committee will anytime now agree on the non-binding guiding principles, which were developed following the Delhi Declaration. And that specifically addresses the practical approaches to dealing with the abuse for terrorism financing of new payment technologies and the use of those technologies to counter financing of terrorism. To avoid unintended consequences in countering the financing of terrorism, we are finalizing our work with OHCHR and other Global Compact members on how to implement CFT measures while ensuring full respect for human rights. I think that would also be a very practical piece for those who want to get it right. The private-public partnerships we've launched this year, but the launch means that we really want to build upon it, and we will keep promoting these ideas and keep working with the private sector in many platforms. And finally, we are working with the Financial Action Task Force, CTED as a co-lead of this project together with France, on the global update on CFT risks and on CFT, on TF risks and trends. You know that their previous update dates back to almost 10 years ago, so it's a collective effort to produce a comprehensive update on what has changed in this 10 years. And there will be very soon a targeted public consultation on this because we want to get this the perspective of stakeholders from several sectors. So something to watch for in your inboxes maybe in the coming week or so. And of course, we thank those member states who provided the updates for that. I will stop here. Please stay in touch. You know where to find us and where to find our speakers. The chat is full of different resources that have been used, you know, throughout the discussions, but also in the past meetings. Please use this opportunity to get connected. This is one other advantage of, you know, attending these webinars in real time. But for those who couldn't attend in real time, as I said in the beginning, we will provide the link of the recording. This will be incorporated in the summary of the discussions that we will put on a dedicated webpage. And once it's all out and about, I will send to all the registered participants the link so that you don't have to look for it and search for it. I thank our discussants. I thank our team. I thank everyone who took the time to participate. And I hope to see you very soon on a different occasion. Thank you very much. Goodbye.